Flash Gordon was supposed to be a shining jewel of late 70s science fiction, a film that could stand tall next to Star Wars and redefine the genre. Instead, its production became a storm of fights, walkouts, mistranslations, and broken dreams. A leading man vanished without warning, directors were pushed aside, and producers made choices that defied all logic. Yet from this chaos, something unexpected survived, a cult classic remembered not for its triumphs, but for its disasters. Today, we dive into the strangest truths that shaped the fate of Flash Gordon, the rejection that changed cinema forever. Long before cameras rolled, the story of Flash Gordon intersected with another legend in the making. In the early 1970s, a young filmmaker named George Lucas walked into Dino De Laurentiis's office. Lucas had grown up with the Flash Gordon comic strips and believed he could bring them to life on the big screen. His pitch was ambitious, a sweeping science fiction epic filled with strange planets, bold heroes, and a clear good versus evil narrative. But Dino De Laurentiis wasn't interested. The Italian producer dismissed Lucas with barely a second thought. That rejection changed film history. Lucas, unwilling to give up, turned his attention to a new idea, one that would borrow the structure of a space opera, but without Flash Gordon's name. Out of that rejection came Star Wars, released in 1977, which reshaped Hollywood forever. Ironically, Star Wars became so successful that De Laurentiis, the very man who turned Lucas away, realized he needed his own sci-fi blockbuster. Suddenly, Flash Gordon, the same property he had refused to hand over, became his golden ticket. In a twist of fate, even Federico Fellini, Italy's most celebrated director, had once been tied to the character. Back in the 1930s, under Mussolini's ban on American comics, a young Fellini secretly worked on bootleg Flash Gordon strips. Decades later, De Laurentiis asked him to direct the film. Fellini politely declined, uninterested in the camp spectacle De Laurentiis envisioned. In a petty move, the producer had Princess Aura's pet named Fellini in the final film, a backhanded tribute that revealed just how personal these rejections had become. One by one, visionary filmmakers like Nicholas Roeg and Sergio Leone considered and abandoned the project. Each departure left the production emptier, less coherent, and more vulnerable. What had begun as a chance to rival Star Wars was quickly turning into a film without direction. But while the directors came and went, the real chaos was just beginning. The star who vanished. From the outside, Sam J. Jones looked like the perfect Flash Gordon. A former Marine, athletic, square-jawed, and blonde, he fit the image of the comic strip hero producers wanted for posters and merchandise. De Laurentiis first noticed him not on a movie set, but on television, when Jones appeared as a contestant on The Dating Game. He didn't win the show, but he caught the producer's eye. With little acting experience beyond a small role in 10, Jones was suddenly thrust into the lead of a $30 million science fiction epic. But the dream quickly began to collapse. Tensions between Jones and De Laurentiis emerged almost immediately. The long shooting days in London, the constant rewrites, and the language barrier with the Italian crew pushed everyone to exhaustion. Jones was already feeling isolated, and by the time the Christmas break arrived during production in late 1979, tempers had frayed. Off-set, he reportedly got into a fight that left him hospitalized. When filming resumed, he returned to finish scenes, but the trust between actor and producer had already shattered. The breaking point came during post-production. Every major film requires ADR, additional dialogue recording, to fix sound issues and polish performances. Jones refused to return for the sessions, citing his broken relationship with the producer. Without their lead actor's voice, the studio had to take extraordinary measures. They quietly brought in a voice actor to dub nearly all of Flash's lines. Audiences in 1980 saw Sam Jones's face, but in many cases did not hear his real voice. It was one of Hollywood's strangest cover-ups, hidden in plain sight on the silver screen. Jones also skipped the press tour, leaving the cast and Queen's booming soundtrack to carry the publicity. His absence cast a shadow over the film's release, and whispers about his disappearance spread through the industry. A $30 million epic had lost its star before it even reached theaters. Flash Gordon became the first major Hollywood production completed with a lead actor who had effectively walked away midstream. For Jones, it marked both the peak and the collapse of his career. He would never again headline a major studio film. The director who lost his film. Mike Hodges wasn't the first choice to direct Flash Gordon. By the time he joined the project in 1979, several directors had already walked away, including Nicholas Roeg and Federico Fellini. The production was already unstable when Hodges stepped in, but he tried to bring order to the chaos. Known for his work on the gritty crime drama Get Carter, he approached Flash Gordon with a sharp eye for satire and tension. His vision leaned into controlled absurdity, playing the material with a straight face while letting the camp elements shine through naturally. For a brief period, Hodges believed he could pull it off. He worked with Lorenzo Semple Jr., the screenwriter best known for the 1960s Batman television series, to balance humor with spectacle. The goal was a film that didn't take itself too seriously, but still had enough sincerity to hold together. But De Laurentiis had other ideas. The producer wanted something bigger, louder, and flashier, a movie that would rival Star Wars not in depth, but in spectacle. What began as creative disagreement soon turned into a power struggle. As filming continued, Hodges found himself pushed aside. Scenes were restructured without his approval. Studio executives made edits behind closed doors. Entire sequences were cut or reshaped, sometimes against his advice. By the time the film reached post-production, Hodges was no longer invited to the editing room. There was no official firing, no public announcement, just a slow erasure of his authority. The final cut bore his name, but much of it no longer reflected his intent. Years later, Hodges described the experience with a mix of pride and distance. He acknowledged the strange charm that came from the production's chaos, but also admitted the movie that audiences saw in December 1980 was not the one he had set out to make. For him, Flash Gordon was a ghost of what it could have been. A reminder of how easily a director can lose control when a producer with unchecked power takes over. Translation chaos and production mayhem. If there was one element that doomed Flash Gordon from within, it was communication. The film was largely shot in London with an Italian production team, and language barriers quickly turned daily work into confusion. Dino De Laurentiis insisted on translating every script draft into Italian so he could review it. Unfortunately, the translator he relied on was notorious for botching even the simplest sentences. When writer Lorenzo Semple Jr. described a tall, beautiful woman entering a room, the Italian draft transformed her into a beautiful cat. Scenes meant to be dramatic or romantic collapsed into nonsense before cameras ever rolled. Semple was horrified. He confronted De Laurentiis, expecting the producer to replace the translator. Instead, De Laurentiis brushed it off, claiming he didn't want to be fooled by words. He insisted he only cared about the story's basic shape, not the finer details of dialogue. For a writer trying to build coherent scenes, this attitude was a nightmare. The mistranslations trickled down to the cast, who received conflicting directions. Some were told to play it completely straight, others to lean into comedy, and a few to improvise when the script didn't make sense. The result was a production where nobody fully understood what kind of movie they were making. Scenes were often rewritten minutes before filming. Actors stopped bothering to read new pages, knowing they would change again by the time the cameras rolled. Improvised lines became common, and sequences that looked chaotic on screen reflected the genuine chaos behind the camera. One of the most famous examples came when Flash Gordon turns a royal execution into a makeshift football game. There was no choreography, no rehearsal, just the cast tossing guards around, throwing fruit, and Brian Blessed shouting plays like a coach in mid-scene. What could have been a disaster turned into one of the film's most iconic moments, precisely because it was unscripted. The confusion extended beyond dialogue. Danilo Donati, an Oscar-winning costume and set designer, obsessed over replicating comic book panels as literally as possible. His costumes looked dazzling, but were almost impossible to wear. The Hawkmen's massive wings stabbed into their backs, forcing grown men to lie face down on the floor between takes. Melody Anderson, who played Dale Arden, endured a full-body paint job and a 25-pound headpiece for a spider transformation scene, only to be told hours later the sequence wasn't even in the script. Actors were tortured for spectacle, all while the story crumbled around them. Brian Blessed, Max von Sydow, and the cast torn apart. Among the chaos, two performances stood out for opposite reasons. One thunderous and unrestrained, the other controlled but plagued by doubt. Brian Blessed, cast as Prince Vultan, the booming leader of the Hawkmen, threw himself into the role with reckless abandon. He refused to use stunt doubles, insisted on flying sequences himself, and strapped on 40-pound wings that cut into his shoulders. During one early take, his rigging failed, and he plunged toward the studio floor with no safety net beneath him. Crew members rushed to break his fall, narrowly saving him from serious injury. Yet instead of demanding changes, Blessed simply dusted himself off, adjusted the straps, and climbed back into the harness. His dedication bordered on madness. On set, his energy was uncontrollable. During battle sequences, Blessed couldn't resist adding his own sound effects, shouting pew, pew, pew as he fired imaginary weapons. The sound team begged him to stop, but he refused. His mix of booming laughter and childlike enthusiasm frustrated editors but electrified his scenes. To audiences, he wasn't just playing a Hawkman, he was one. By contrast, Max von Sydow approached his role as Ming the Merciless with deep hesitation. Known for The Seventh Seal and The Exorcist, von Sydow was one of Europe's most respected actors. Accepting the role of a cartoonish villain drenched in camp was a risk that could tarnish decades of carefully built prestige. He reportedly despised his costume, struggled with the over-the-top dialogue, and questioned whether the entire film had slid into parody. More than once he voiced his doubts aloud, wondering if the production would undo his reputation. But fate had other plans. When the film premiered, critics and audiences alike singled out his performance as the highlight. His commanding presence anchored the absurdity around him. Over time, what once felt like a career risk transformed into one of his most iconic roles. The tragic irony was clear. While von Sydow feared Flash Gordon would harm his legacy, it ultimately cemented it. The rest of the cast lived somewhere between these extremes. Melody Anderson described her casting as a kind of kidnapping. De Laurentiis pressured her into taking the role when she had planned to move to Los Angeles for television work. Timothy Dalton, years away from becoming James Bond, treated the job as just another paycheck, arriving, delivering lines, and leaving without fuss. Each actor carried their own version of frustration, fear, or indifference. Together, they reflected the fractured spirit of the production itself, some enthralled, some embarrassed, and others just trying to survive. Queen's soundtrack, censorship, and the cult legacy. If the visuals of Flash Gordon were chaotic, its soundtrack became the film's saving grace. At first, Dino De Laurentiis considered Pink Floyd, but he admitted he had never even heard their music. Instead, someone played him a Queen record. After just a few seconds, he reportedly said, "Get me the Queens." What followed was a race against time. In the middle of their world tour, Queen had only weeks to compose an entire score. They wrote in hotel rooms, recorded between concerts, and stitched together a soundtrack unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. The result wasn't just background music, it was a full-blown rock opera. Freddie Mercury's soaring vocals, Brian May's pounding guitar riffs, and Roger Taylor's thunderous drums turned campy spectacle into unforgettable spectacle. The music gave life to scenes that otherwise teetered on collapse. Decades later, fans still cite Queen's soundtrack as the most enduring part of the film, proof that brilliance can emerge from the strangest collaborations. But even with Queen's magic, the movie carried a darker weight. Censors in several countries flagged scenes that went too far. In Ireland and Singapore, Ming's wedding sequence, intended as absurd camp, was viewed as disturbingly threatening. His dialogue toward Dale Arden pushed the limits of what family films could show in 1980. In Malaysia and other regions, the imagery itself, circular symbols, ritualistic costumes, dark ceremonies, was accused of promoting occult themes. The film was banned outright in some territories, heavily edited in others, and even reclassified for restricted audiences. What the filmmakers saw as harmless fantasy became in some places a source of moral panic. When Flash Gordon opened in the United States in December 1980, it struggled. Critics dismissed it, audiences expected another Star Wars, and box office numbers disappointed. But across the Atlantic, something different happened. In Britain, the absurdity was embraced. The film played regularly on television, Queen's soundtrack blasted in shops, and children grew up quoting Brian Blessed's immortal line, "Gordon's alive." Decades later, actor Brian Blessed even revealed that Queen Elizabeth II herself admitted she loved the film, rewatching it with her grandchildren during the holidays. Whether myth or memory, the story captured the strange affection that grew around the movie. In time, what began as a failed blockbuster transformed into a cult phenomenon. Filmmakers like Edgar Wright and Taika Waititi later credited Flash Gordon as inspiration, praising its fearless absurdity. James Gunn pointed to it as a blueprint for Guardians of the Galaxy. What critics had scorned in 1980 became, for a new generation, a lesson in unrestrained creativity. Its flaws turned into personality, its mistakes into charm, and its chaos into legend. And in one final bizarre twist, early 1980s memos even floated the idea of a sequel crossover with James Bond, a cosmic Cold War with MI6 facing Ming the Merciless. It never left the planning stage, but the thought alone symbolized just how strange Flash Gordon's legacy had become. Flash Gordon may have been born from chaos, but it left behind one of the most unforgettable cult legacies in cinema. Which part of its strange story surprises you the most? The vanished star, the battles with censors, or the fact that Queen Elizabeth herself was a fan? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from behind the screen.